I'm not sure how to start. I still remember the first time Lori walked into my restaurant. I was busy, as always, hunched over the grill, flipping burgers and making sure everything was running smoothly. The hustle and bustle of the kitchen was my world. That day, she walked in with her bright smile and a kind of energy I didn't know I needed. She wasn't just beautiful, there was something about her that drew me in. Lori wasn't just another face in the crowd. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were making plans for dinner. I was 36 back then, a man who had never really thought about settling down. But something about Lori made me want to change everything. We got married a year later, and soon after, we had our son, Martin. Everything seemed perfect. Lori was perfect. I thought life would always be this way, simple, straightforward, just us, our family, and the restaurant. The first few years of marriage were incredible. We ran the restaurant together. Lori handled the accounting, the finances, while I stayed in the kitchen, making sure our customers got the best fast food in Miami. Everything worked like a well-oiled machine. But, as time passed, the routines started to settle in. Our lives became predictable, and predictability can sometimes become a trap. I don't blame her for what happened next, but I started noticing Lori pulling away. She was less involved with the restaurant, and I wasn't sure why. She started working part-time at a car wash. At first, I didn't think much of it. She said it was just to help with the books there, something to keep her busy. I didn't mind, she was still doing something productive, and I respected her for that. But the distance between us started growing. Her late hours at the car wash, the way she seemed more distracted whenever we spoke, it was becoming hard to ignore. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was everything. I could feel Lori slipping away, like she was no longer the woman I had married. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was small things. She didn't ask about the new specials I was working on. She didn't care about how the restaurant was doing, and most nights, she came home late, exhausted, but distant. I kept trying to brush it off, tell myself she was just tired, that things would get better. But the more I tried, the more I felt like I was losing her. One evening, I asked her how things were going at the car wash. She mentioned her boss, Esteban, a couple of times. "He's really knowledgeable about cars, Paul," she said with a smile, as if something about him fascinated her. I didn't think much of it at the time, but a small seed of doubt was planted. It started small. Little things that should have been easy to overlook but slowly built up into something more. Lori and I had always had our rhythm. She was the numbers person, keeping track of everything for the restaurant, while I ran the kitchen. We had our roles, our routines. But lately, she'd been mentioning Esteban more and more. At first, I thought it was just innocent conversation. She'd talk about him at dinner, mostly when the subject of work came up. "Esteban's really into classic cars, Paul. You should see the things he restores. He's got such a passion for it." She'd go on for a few minutes about how much she admired his knowledge, and I'd nod, distracted by whatever was on my mind at the time. But over time, I started noticing a change in her tone. She seemed lighter when she talked about him, more animated. Her eyes would brighten, and her lips would curl into that smile that was reserved for only certain moments. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy, though I pushed it down. I trusted her, or at least, I thought I did. One afternoon, I had to leave the kitchen for a moment to grab some supplies from the back office. As I walked by Lori's desk, I overheard her on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the conversation caught my attention. "Yeah, I remember you mentioning that band before," Lori was saying, her voice playful. "I love their stuff. Maybe we can go to a show next weekend?" "Sounds like fun." It was the way she said it, casual, but too flirtatious for my liking. I stopped in my tracks for a second, caught between confronting her or pretending like I hadn't heard anything. I decided not to say anything at the moment. After all, it could just be a friendly conversation, right? But inside, something started to shift. It was a feeling I couldn't shake off, and it only grew stronger with each passing day. Lori didn't just admire Esteban's work anymore, there was something else there. And I was beginning to realize that maybe I wasn't the only one noticing him. The signs were there, but I still ignored them, hoping that it was all just in my head. I told myself that Lori was just getting caught up in something new, something that kept her mind busy and her spirit alive. But deep down, I felt a shift I couldn't deny. Esteban was always there, in the background of our conversations. Even when Lori wasn't at the car wash, she'd bring him up. Sometimes it was a mention of something he'd said or done, but other times, it was more than that. Lori would laugh a little too long at some joke he made, or she'd linger on a story, almost as if she were savoring the memory. I remember the first time she really caught me off guard. We were sitting in our living room, and she was flipping through her phone, showing me some pictures of a new car that Esteban had been restoring. She was practically glowing as she spoke about it. "You should see the way Esteban handles these old engines, Paul. It's incredible. I don't know how he knows all this stuff." She looked up from her phone and gave me a grin that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm thinking we could both learn a lot from him." I nodded, trying to mask the unease that was creeping into my chest. It wasn't just about the cars anymore. It was the way she was looking at me, like she was almost expecting me to be impressed. But the more she spoke, the more I started to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. It wasn't long before I began to notice more than just the casual mentions of Esteban. Lori would leave for the car wash later than usual, sometimes coming home after dark. She'd tell me she was just staying to help him with some extra paperwork, but the excuse started to feel like a cover-up. She was withdrawing from me, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was because of him. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to follow her. I didn't want to, but something pushed me to do it. She'd left earlier than normal, telling me she was staying late to work on a new project at the car wash. I wasn't convinced. I parked a few blocks away and waited. I don't know what I was hoping to see, maybe nothing, maybe everything. But when I saw her pull into the lot and park next to Esteban's car, a wave of dread washed over me. I stayed in my car, watching from a distance. Lori didn't see me. She got out of her car and walked towards the office, where Esteban was waiting. They exchanged a few words, laughing together as they walked inside. My chest tightened, and I couldn't bring myself to look away. I watched as they disappeared into the building, and I stayed there, even though I knew I should have left. It was like I couldn't stop myself, even though everything inside me was screaming to turn around and go home. It wasn't long before the lights inside the car wash flickered off, signaling that they were closing up for the night. Esteban walked out first, and Lori followed soon after, her hair slightly messy, her steps a little unsteady. She wasn't alone. I saw them laugh together again, and then, as if the moment had been brewing for some time, Esteban leaned in. And then it happened, he kissed her. It was quick, but it felt like time stopped. I should have gone to them. I should have confronted them right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't move. I just sat in the car, frozen, as they pulled away from each other, and Lori stumbled back to her car. That night, she came home late, and when she walked through the door, I didn't even need to ask. The guilt was written all over her face. She didn't even look me in the eye. She started apologizing, but I didn't let her speak. I already knew, and I couldn't forget what I had seen. The more I ignored my feelings, the more Lori seemed to withdraw from me. There were nights when she stayed late at the car wash, working overtime to help Esteban with some project they had. I never asked questions. I didn't want to know the details. But the late nights became more frequent. She started forgetting little things at home. Martin's school events, my birthday, things that would have mattered to her before, now seemed like an afterthought. I knew she was still there, physically, but she wasn't really there, you know? Her mind was somewhere else. I began to wonder if I was losing her, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. Then came the night she stayed even later than usual. I knew something was wrong. It had been building for weeks, even months. Lori and I hadn't had the same connection we once did. The energy between us had changed, like the air had thickened and nothing felt clear anymore. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. It started like any other. She told me she was going to stay late at the car wash, finishing up some paperwork with Esteban. I didn't think much of it at the time. She had been working extra hours there for weeks. But something felt different that evening. The usual casualness in her voice wasn't there. There was an edge to her words, something sharp, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that everything was fine. I had stayed up late that night, closing up the restaurant after a long shift. The hours passed slowly, and with each passing minute, I felt an anxious knot tighten in my stomach. I kept checking my phone, waiting for her to text or call. But she didn't. Around midnight, I decided to stop waiting and go to bed. I was exhausted, mentally and physically drained from the constant stress of running the restaurant, but sleep didn't come. My mind raced, thoughts of Lori and Esteban, their shared laughs, their inside jokes, the way she spoke about him with admiration. It made me sick to my stomach. Then, the door opened. I heard her footsteps, too light, too quick, and I knew she was home. I sat up in bed, still fully dressed, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked into the bedroom, looking disheveled, her eyes slightly glassy. She was drunk. Lori never came home this late. She never came home drunk. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too soft, too high-pitched. "Sorry, I lost track of time." I stared at her, my stomach churning. "Lost track of time?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" "It's past midnight." She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she tugged at the hem of her sweater, as if trying to distract herself. "Esteban and I had a few drinks after we finished up. It wasn't a big deal, Paul." The words didn't sound convincing, and I could see it in her face. Her guilt was written all over her. but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. For a moment, the silence between us hung heavy, thick, and suffocating. I felt anger building up in me, the frustration bubbling up, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice unsteady. I wanted to say something, to accuse her of everything I already knew, but I couldn't. I didn't want to hear her lies, her excuses. So I did the one thing I knew best. I shut down. I turned away from her, rolling over in bed, my back facing her. She stood there for a few moments, but I didn't look back. Eventually, she climbed into bed beside me, her body close, but emotionally miles away. I could feel the tension between us, thick and unyielding. The next morning, things were different. The distance between us had grown even more, and the space in our bed seemed larger than it had ever been. I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. I knew. The days that followed were filled with a kind of numbness that I couldn't shake. Lori tried to act like everything was normal, but I wasn't blind. I could see through her attempts to smooth things over. It wasn't the same. The spark that used to be there was gone. The warmth between us had been replaced with a cold distance, a wall that neither of us knew how to tear down. She spent more time at the car wash. The late nights had become routine. The excuses were the same: more work to do, extra hours to help Esteban finish some project. I could tell she wasn't telling me everything, but I wasn't sure if I even wanted to know. I tried to focus on work, keeping the restaurant running, managing the staff, keeping myself busy, but my mind would always wander back to her. Back to Esteban. Back to that kiss I knew had happened. Then, one night, Lori came home late again. But this time, she didn't seem tipsy. She seemed sober, too sober, almost. And she wasn't smiling. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. She didn't even bother to take off her coat. She just stood there, looking at me, and for the first time in weeks, she met my gaze directly. "I need to tell you something," Lori said, her voice cracking. "Something you already know." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was already racing, and I could feel my blood boiling in my veins. I knew exactly what she was about to say, but I needed her to say it. I needed her to admit it. I kissed him, Paul," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It happened the other night, after we finished working. Esteban and I, we had some wine. And then, we just kissed. I'm so sorry." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell at her, demand to know how it happened, how long it had been going on, but I couldn't. I was choking on the hurt, the betrayal. All I could do was sit there, staring at her, waiting for the rest of the story. But the rest didn't matter. The kiss was enough. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she continued, her eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I'm not sure what's happening anymore, Paul. I don't know. I'm so sorry." The apology felt empty. She had said all the right words, but they didn't mean anything anymore. Everything we had built together, the trust, the foundation of our marriage, had crumbled in that single moment. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The truth was right in front of me. She had kissed him. and I had no idea if I could ever forgive her for it. But I couldn't stay there with her, not in that moment. I stood up, walked past her, and out of the house. I needed air. I needed to think. I didn't know how long I stood outside, breathing in the cool night air. But when I came back inside, Lori was gone. She had packed a small bag, left a note saying she was going to stay with her sister. I didn't stop her. What was the point? We both knew this was over. That night, when Lori finally confessed, I felt like the ground beneath me had cracked open. She told me she kissed Esteban, and for a moment, time stopped. The words hit harder than I expected, because deep down, I already knew. I had seen it, the way she'd looked at him, the way she'd pulled away from me. But hearing it from her mouth was a punch I wasn't ready for. Her apology was hollow, her voice shaking with guilt. She said it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But I couldn't wrap my mind around it. A kiss wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice she made when she looked at him and not me. A choice she made when she allowed herself to feel something for him. I trusted you, Lori, I whispered, choking on the words. I gave you everything, and you chose him. Her eyes filled with tears, but it wasn't enough. The damage was done. She had betrayed me in the most intimate way, and no apology could undo that. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice barely audible, as I turned to walk away. She reached out for me, but I couldn't let her touch me. Not anymore. As I stepped out into the night, a deep emptiness settled over me. I loved her, but the woman I trusted was gone. And I didn't know how to fix the broken pieces of my heart. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. I couldn't take it anymore. I had spent days in torment, wrestling with the pain, the anger, and the betrayal. Every time I looked at Lori, I couldn't see the woman I married. All I saw was someone who had broken my trust, who had chosen someone else over me. The decision to end things wasn't easy, but it was clear. I couldn't go on living a lie. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when my heart was shattered. I filed for divorce. The papers were simple, clear, and final. I didn't want to drag this out, didn't want to waste any more time on something that was already broken beyond repair. When I handed them to Lori, her face fell. She knew what was coming. She knew she had lost me. But even then, she tried to plead with me. She begged, apologized over and over, saying how much she loved me. But the words felt empty now. She couldn't take back what she had done. I can't do this anymore, I told her, my voice shaking with a mixture of sadness and anger. You broke everything, Lori. You broke us. She cried. I saw the hurt in her eyes, but it didn't change anything. I had to protect myself now. I had to walk away from the woman who had chosen another man, from the woman who had taken everything I gave her and thrown it away. I didn't want this. I didn't want a broken family, but I couldn't live in the shadow of her betrayal. The restaurant, the house, our son, they were all still a part of me, but they couldn't fix this. I couldn't fix this. I took my things and left the house, the weight of the divorce papers in my hand. Lori stood there, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't look back. There was nothing left to say. As I walked away from everything I had known, all I could feel was the emptiness. The future I had imagined with Lori was gone. And now, all I had was the painful truth. Sometimes, love isn't enough to save what's already been broken.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gabby's cheating stories. See you on the next one.